For anybody who doesn't know who I am, my name is Tony. I'm the owner of Epic, and we are a strength and conditioning coaching company. We provide programming for athletes mainly, but really anybody who needs help with their strength and conditioning and just get you to that next level. Ideally, we have clients that are athletes already to push you up to another level, but we have programming for anybody. Pretty soon we'll be offering personal training services as well. I am a strength and conditioning coach, certified under the Bioforce Strength and Conditioning Program. Joel Jamieson and his crew over there have an outstanding program. If you've never heard about it, never heard about him, look into him. Joel Jamieson is a fantastic coach, very, very smart guy. Been doing this for a long, long time, and he can help you with just about anything. Just look him up. He's got all kinds of great information all over the web. People talk about him all the time in the strength and conditioning community. He's just a very smart guy, very, very great coach. So aside from all that, if you go to www.extremeperformance.us, you can go to my webpage. There you can see some of the programs we have. We have more stuff coming. So if you have any interest in that, just look on the website, look around, maybe find something you like. In addition to all that, this is the home of the Epic Cauliflower Ear Kit. If you are involved in any combat sports, boxing, jiu-jitsu, any martial arts, then you know what cauliflower ear is, and you know how bad it can hurt and how much it can derail your training. So if you have this kit right here, you can have all the tools you need to address the injury as it happens and take care of it and just be able to carry on with your training. It's important that you're able to keep doing that so you don't fall back and lose the ground that you've gained already. Again, that's on our website, extremeperformance.us. You can check out the cauliflower ear kit there as well. So what we're talking about today are our energy systems that we have inside of our body. It's not quite as simple as aerobic versus anaerobic. That's a big picture, but it gets a bit more detailed than that. And if you are an athlete looking to improve your different levels of fitness, depending on your sport, you're going to have different zones that you're going to want to train in. So it's important to understand these things and be sure that you're training appropriately for your sport. So the first question I propose to anybody is, can you have a high level of fitness with a poor level of conditioning? So think about that for a few minutes and we'll discuss it. If you're in any fight sports, think about fitness versus conditioning. We've probably all seen these videos of these guys come into these gyms and they want to challenge somebody to a fight. Maybe they don't believe in martial arts or whatever the case is, or they're just dumb. These big, strong guys, usually some bodybuilder type, they walk in there and they say, I want to challenge one of your fighters or your head coach or something like that. It never works out well for that person. Are they fit? Are they big? Are they strong? Can they move? Yeah, probably. Are they conditioned for that sport? Absolutely not. It never, ever works out in their favor. So we'll touch more on fitness versus conditioning here in a few minutes. So think about why it is that we fatigue, why our bodies get tired, what it is. Big picture, it's just a matter of inability to use energy appropriately. So the more efficiently you can move, the less energy you require. So if you are an endurance runner and your running form is all over the map, then you are not going to be moving as efficiently. You're going to be using more energy than you would if you had proper running form. Same goes for any sport. Think about boxing. If you're not twerking your hips, getting enough torque in your hips to throw those punches, then you're expending more energy from different parts of your body. Learning how to throw your strikes and the timing and how to really put your body into it, it's important. And you use less energy to do that, so you can maximize the use of energy with proper form. So when it comes to using energy and why we fatigue, I haven't heard it so much lately, but it used to be all about lactic acid. People would say, lactic acid is terrible. There's all this lactic acid building up in my system. That's why I'm fatiguing. That's why I'm cramping, all this other stuff. That's not necessarily true. Lactic acid has been demonized for a long time, but the reality is lactic acid is a fuel source in your body. So we'll go over how to train in the right zone to be able to use that efficiently. So fatigue is the body's natural protective measure to maintain homeostasis. That's what your body is always wanting to do, maintain some level of homeostasis, regulate temperature, regulate your bodily functions, make sure your brain, your heart, your lungs, these vital organs are still working just right. So when we exercise and we fatigue, we get to that fatigue level and we're constantly pushing ourselves, your body sends all these signals to your body and say, hey, well, slow down. Well, what we'll talk about today will teach you how to get around that. And there's no single factor for why we fatigue. You may think it's because you didn't get any sleep, or the exercise particularly tough, or maybe it is just poor conditioning. There's never any one single factor. There's always multifactorial, and it's something to keep in mind. And lastly, why we fatigue? People will say it's because their ATP stores in your muscles are being depleted. Well, that is true to a certain extent, but your muscles will never ever run out of ATP. That's another defense mechanism built into your body. It's just not going to happen. So if you hear somebody say we're running out of ATP and that's why we fatigue, no, it's not true. So first, we're going to talk about some big picture stuff, and then we'll get down into more specific ways to train in these particular zones. But first, we have to identify the zones and what it is that we're doing. So to start all that, we'll start with the Autonomic Nervous System, the ANS. So the ANS is responsible for controlling all the major bodily functions, your brain function, your heart function, your lungs, these big organs in your body that are vital for not only health but survival. So that's big picture what the autonomic nervous system is responsible for. So within the autonomic nervous system, you have the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. So if you're in the military or law enforcement or security or maybe even in fight sports, you've probably heard of the fight or flight response. Okay, that is your sympathetic nervous system. And fight or flight is the simplest way to summarize what that sympathetic nervous system is responsible for. It is a very almost animalistic quality that we have, and it's something to be appreciated. So when you get scared, like if you get frightened or you get jumpy, all these reactions are going to happen in your body. Or if you can sense a fight coming. Say you're walking on the street and somebody challenges you to a fight, however the situation plays out, it's the fight or flight response that's kicking in. Either if you choose to fight or flee, this system is still, nothing changes about it. So one of the first things you're going to notice is an increase in your heart rate, along with increase in your blood pressure. The heart rate's going to start pumping up. It's getting you ready to make some explosive movements or to flee. You're going to have increased blood flow. Blood flow is going to start getting restricted to non-essential areas of your body, less essential organs in your body, and it's going to go directly to the critical areas. It's another defense mechanism that we have in our bodies. Your digestion is going to slow down, your appetite's going to pretty much go away, and your pupils are going to be dilated. One reason for that, again, back to the animalistic qualities that we have, dilated pupils, you want to be able to see. Right? So your body's going to open up and you're going to be able to see exactly what your threat is. And that's the qualities of the sympathetic nervous system. So parasympathetic nervous system is just the opposite of that. It's going to be responsible mostly for rest and recovery. And this system is working almost all day. Pretty much when it's not in your sympathetic nervous system that's taken over, your parasympathetic nervous system is going to be the one doing most of the work. You can think of it as just being responsible for rest and recovery. It keeps your heart rate down, blood pressure down. It's going to dilate your blood vessels, so that promotes the proper blood flow and getting energy stored in your body, going along with rest and recovery. You stimulate digestion, you get everything working the way it's supposed to be. Appetite's going to be increased, and your pupils will be constricted. You're not needing all this stuff to be active at once, and that's what the parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for. So how does this relate to fitness and more specifically strength and conditioning? Well, sympathetic nervous system, it really applies to, I'd say, all sports, all competitive sports, but I would highlight this for any combat sports or, say, tactical athletes. You are really going to see this, you feel it, almost visually identify it in your fighters. But any competitive sport, you're going to have at least some of this that you can notably identify. All of it's going to be present. Say you're a track athlete and you're getting ready to run a sprint, and you have the nerves kicking in, butterflies in your stomach. That's what all this is. All this going on is your sympathetic nervous system getting activated and getting you ready for the competition in that case. And combat sports for the fight. Okay. Now, training will get you to a point where you can, this all is still going to happen, but you can control it, and it's not going to take over your body. Right? So if you're fighting in your first fight or your first tournament or whatever, all this is going to be destroying your body. Through proper training, you can mitigate how damaging this is to your body. Okay, so let's go back to our initial question. We have a few more people jump on, so we'll ask it again. Can you have a high level of fitness and a poor level of conditioning? The answer is yes, absolutely. So what metrics do we use to measure fitness? There's a lot, but let's say the more popular ones, VO2 max, or max heart rate, your resting heart rate, your average heart rate, or something called HRV, that's heart rate variability. For anybody who's not familiar with heart rate variability, I advise you to look it up. And if you're not using some type of heart monitoring device, whether it's wrist worn or chest strap, I would highly recommend that you get your hands on one. They're pretty cheap now, and you wear it on your wrist all day long. It's just, if you're an athlete and you're not monitoring this kind of stuff, you are a step behind the curve. You're pretty far back behind the curve, actually, because this is just so readily available. You've got people who don't train anything, just keeping track of all that data, and if you're not, you're just getting kind of left in the dust there. That's my opinion anyway. So fitness is the potential that you have for performance. You can jump high, you can lift weights, you can do all these explosive movements. It's potential, okay? But that does not necessarily equal the ability to do it, which is conditioning. So a well-conditioned athlete, again, go back to fighters, because I think combat sports, it's just easier to recognize these things. Conditioning is your ability to do it, both physically and mentally, being prepared for what's coming and being able to execute in the proper environment. So back to fighters, let's say you're training and you're not preparing for the fight itself. You're not focusing on time of day. You're not focusing on the environment, the physical environment. If you're fighting in a cage, you need to be training in a cage. You're fighting in a ring, fight in a ring, so on and so forth. Those things are really important, and it plays into your conditioning. Conditioning is the ability to use your fitness to accomplish whatever your goal is in that environment. And with the event of social media, you see all these crazy workouts, these people who are no doubt really fit, and they're doing these really interesting exercises, which are great, but the reality is, I mean, I don't think they're actually doing it. I think it's just a scam to get people to buy into their programming. But conditioning absolutely has to be individualized for you or whoever it is that you're pushing through this stuff. It can take anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks before you start seeing notable changes in your conditioning. And if you're already a conditioned athlete, when you enter, let's say, a fight camp, if you already have a high level of conditioning, it can take up to 12 weeks to actually see notable increases in your your conditioning levels. Oh, we didn't talk about HRV. So HRV is a metric of fitness, but you can use your HRV to increase your conditioning. HRV is your heart rate variability. To summarize it, it's a measure of the time between your heartbeats. That's a real simple way of defining it. And what HRV can tell you is how hard you're training, how hard you're pushing yourself, and more importantly, do you need to dial it back a little bit? Because if you rush into your conditioning too fast and you overload your system, your central nervous system along with your ANS is going to get flooded, and you will start having some reactions in your body that are going to be not exactly conducive to continuing training, and eventually that leads to injury. It could be a physical injury like broken bones or torn tendons or something along those lines, or it could even be mental, just from the exhaustion. You could also start having some issues with your blood flow and all these other problems. So HRV is a great tool to use to tell you if you can continue to train at a certain level of intensity. That doesn't mean that you don't have hard training days often and continue to make progress, but it means that some days are going to be more intense than others. And with proper programming, you don't really have to worry about that, because your coach should be telling you, today we're going to go all out. Next couple of days we're going to dial it back a little bit. It should come in waves. Okay. All right. So we're going to move on to aerobic and anaerobic exercise. So first we'll talk about aerobic exercise. Everyone knows aerobic exercise. You just sum it up. This is cardio. All right. That's true. Cardio is when your body uses oxygen to perform the activities, and it's anything lasting longer than 60 seconds is when your aerobic system starts kicking in. So if you're going to be doing your cardio, it's got to be, definitely has to be longer than a minute, but we're looking more like 30 to 90 minutes for an effective aerobic training system. So I'll keep using my example of fighters. A lot of fighters, you say aerobic, I'm not going to do 30 minutes of cardio. It's just, I'm not going to do it. Or say your power lifters, your sports that have a lot of ego with them, they're not going to want to do this. Well, there's more benefits than just trying to burn fat or whatever your goal is with increasing your aerobic capacity. Your aerobic system is engaged almost always, but it is responsible for fueling your recovery, and that's what's even more important. So if you have a high aerobic capacity, then you are going to recover more efficiently, and that is key for any athlete, especially competitive athletes, is recovery. And you need to be aware of that when you're doing aerobic exercise. We'll go over different types of aerobic exercise here in just a little bit. It's not quite as simple as just sitting on a treadmill for 30 minutes and calling it a day, especially if you're a higher level athlete. Now your anaerobic system, so your body does not use oxygen doesn't need oxygen for fuel. And within the anaerobic system, you have two systems. You have the lactic and you have the alactic system. So this is what I was talking about when we first started. Lactic acid, it's not the enemy that it's been made out to be. It just isn't. It's a fuel source. So your lactic system, the range here is about 30 to 40 seconds with long rest periods, up to 2, maybe 3 minutes. That's the zone where you're going to be training your lactic system. Your alactic system, it's the most powerful energy system that we have, but it's not adaptable. It's very hard to train in this zone and make progress with it. It's just your body's stubborn in that regard, and I think it goes back to it being a defense mechanism for your body to preserve energy and all that. It's really hard to train your alactic system. Not impossible though, But if you are going to be working your alactic system, 3 to 6 seconds of work. It doesn't take much work, but this is all out effort. 3 to 6 seconds of maximum effort with about 2 or 3 minutes of rest in between. So, I mean, in my opinion, one reason why it's difficult to train this is because it's hard to really go all out for 3 to 6 seconds. Say you're maxing out at 6 seconds. Well, it's hard to do that, especially if you don't have any equipment. Your environment is, it's all flat or whatever. You can do it, but just keep that in mind. It is difficult to train this. So this is all nice to know information. Now we're going to start getting into a little bit more detailed stuff. So this graph, on the y-axis you have power of energy production, and on the x, duration of production, time. Okay, so you can see here where your alactic, anaerobic, and your aerobic systems, how they proceed over time. So these are both your anaerobic systems here. So you can see up to 60 seconds, maybe pushing up to 90 for some people, your anaerobic system is engaged. Somewhere around here, your anaerobic or your aerobic system takes over, and it can go up for hours. So alactic system, upwards of 10 to 12 seconds. Your lactic system, a minute to maybe a minute and a half, depending on the individual. And then anything past that 60-second mark, your aerobic system is starting to take over, and then it takes over. If you guys have any questions, just throw it in the chat room on Facebook, on Instagram. I'll have to get back to your questions a little bit later. All right, so we've said all that, and now we're going to get into the more interesting part, which is how you can actually engage these systems for performance. Give me just a couple minutes here. Once all this is done, I'm going to be posting my notes in the comment section, and they'll be on Facebook and Instagram for anybody to see. So if you're worried about missing a few things, don't be, because I'll make sure it's on there. It's also going to be up on YouTube, and I'll have all the proper notes on there too. So I mentioned this just a little bit ago. You need to be monitoring your progress. How you do that, it's up to you. But the simplest thing you can do is get yourself a device, a wearable device that you can track your information all day long. So let's talk about the different ways you can do that. Really, there's only two, unless you're in a medical experiment, you have EKG or something like that. You have your wrist-worn devices, and then you have devices like this, heart rate strap. This is the MyZone. I use the MyZone. I think it's great, and I use it in conjunction with another system that I'll talk about here in just a few minutes. One thing I love about the MyZone is once you put it on, it starts tracking like that, and you can have the data on the monitor itself for up to 16 hours before you have to sync it. So you can, it's not a rush. It's not something you actually have to think about. I think it's just a great system. There's an app for it that I think it's well organized. There are some things that I would change about it, but like overall, I think the MyZone is great, and it pairs with other devices too. So you don't have to just have the MyZone app running. You can change it up and work with different systems. So wrist versus strap. Strap's the way to go, hands down. When I'm working out, when I'm training, I don't wear this. I wear it all other times of the day, even when I'm sleeping, because it tracks all kinds of good information for me. But if you are going to be exercising and you're wearing a heart rate monitor, the strap is definitely the way to go. I wear it when I train jiu-jitsu, and I've never had any issues with it. It stays on, stays in place. The only time that I have where it's moving around a little bit is when I do anything overhead and my body lengthens in this area. But that is it. I mean, and that's rare for me anyway. Even training jiu-jitsu, it stays in place, and it's just a good system. So in addition to that, another system I use is called the Morpheus system. This is something that Joel Jamieson and the guys at Bioforce Conditioning did. The Morpheus system is great. We talked about HRV just a little while ago, the heart rate variability, and how it is that we use that system. Morpheus actually tells you what your HRV is. You test yourself every day, and it's also giving you what they call a recovery score. And different apps have different types of recovery score, something along those lines. The algorithms for each system is going to be a little bit different. I trust the Morpheus system, but it actually gives you a score based on 100% of where you are based on your HRV and a few other factors like how you slept, how you're feeling, that kind of stuff. It gives you a recovery score. For Morpheus, anything over 80%, you're good, you can go hard. Those days that you do train hard and your central nervous system is depressed, you aren't going to necessarily notice that all the time, but your HRV is usually pretty reflective of how your central nervous system is, and it gives you great insight into when you can be training hard and when maybe you should dial it back a little bit. Again, it goes back to not injuring yourself. Preventing injury and preventing the burnout is pretty important, especially if you're a competitive athlete. If you're in a fight camp, you don't want to get injured because you will probably get set back 2 to 3 weeks, depending on the injury, and that's no good for anybody. If you fight professionally, then you're pretty much done at that point. So why are we interested in monitoring? So whatever your sport is, you need to be training sport specific. That's important. So I will use a fighter example again. If a fighter or anyone involved in combat sports was training and it wasn't conducive to their sport, let's say you're a jiu-jitsu competitor and you're not training jiu-jitsu, well, that's not going to help you because it comes back to fitness versus conditioning. If you're not conditioned for your sport, you're not conditioned for that event, then you are going to be lagging behind. Can you still be successful? Absolutely, sure you can. Is that the norm? No, absolutely is not. You're not going to see NFL teams not practicing football. It's just not how it's going to go. So let's talk about fitness itself. So there are some generally accepted fitness markers that have been industry norms for a long time. Some data that has been around for 100 plus years, and some that has just been around for well, a lot less than that. So you have a 1.5 mile run. Why 1.5 miles? This data has been researched over and over again. It's simple. It's simple. It's not hard to find an area where you can run 1.5 miles. If you don't have a 1.5 mile circle, run a couple circles. Keep running until you hit 1.5 miles. Your time on here will be a metric for tracking your improvement later on. So outside of that, you have the 12-minute test. 12-minute test comes from the Cooper test. If you don't know about the Cooper test, look it up. It's a test from the 80s, I believe. Mr. Cooper put a lot of time and effort in this, and basically came down to figuring out that 12 minutes of effort, track that, and it gives you a good sense of, a good metric for your general fitness. So 12 minutes is the time to work. And you look up the Cooper test, you can see there's charts that you can gauge your level of fitness off of the Cooper test results. So for example, if you are a 20 to 29-year-old female, according to the Cooper test, excellent conditioning would be covering about 2.5 kilometers in 12 minutes. This would be excellent. Poor conditioning would be somewhere around 1.5 kilometers in 12 minutes. That's for a 20 to 29-year-old female. If you look up the Cooper test, the actual chart is up there all over the web. And you can see your age group, your sex, and time yourself, and you can figure out, give yourself a general idea of where you're at. So we talked about HRV. I'm a huge proponent of using technology to gauge your improvements. We have it now. Why not use it? The athletes of yesteryear for the past 40, 50, 100, couple thousand years have never had this kind of thing to actually tell them how they're doing. And we have it now. It's built into my Garmin. It's built into the Fitbit. It's built into the Apple Watch, that's pretty much all the main wearables right there. If you have a wearable device, chances are it can track your HRV. You just got to figure out how to do it for whatever your device is. So another huge metric that is going to play into when we get into the actual training here a little bit is the 60-second heart rate recovery. So what this means is, let's say you're doing something and you're going all out, max effort, or even 70, 75% effort. Can you get to an appropriate recovery zone within 60 seconds? That should always be your goal with most of these training methods. You want to see a heart rate recovery around in the 130s, maybe up to 150s, depending on how much effort you're expending. Personally, I shoot for 130s in between my sets, in between my rounds of conditioning. 60-second heart rate recovery. It allows you to see where you are. So as you increase the reps, the rounds of conditioning that you're doing, your heart rate recovery is going to get less and less. And that allows you to gauge where you are conditioning wise. So let's say you're doing 5 rounds of whatever method it is, and on your 4th round, you start to see that your recovery zone, you're not getting to your recovery zone within 60 seconds. Well, that lets you know that you're getting to your threshold. Do that 5th round. If you can do 2 consecutive rounds where you're failing to get in this zone, well, now you know the marker for more training in the future. And your average heart rate is another marker. So again, if you're not using some device to track your heart rate, personally, I think that you are falling behind. But whatever device you're using, if you're using one, it's probably going to be able to give you your average heart rate, and that's the average throughout the day. So my resting heart rate when I woke up today was around 50. Usually mine's between 50 and 54 on any given day. That allows you to see how well conditioned you are, at least one aspect of that, and your fitness. So I think it's important to track that stuff. It's just, why not? You're probably wearing it on your wrist right now. All right, so now we will get into the part that's going to benefit you the most. All this information was good background information. It's all good background information, but now we'll get into the methods themselves of how you actually increase your performance. So first we'll start with alactic intervals. So alactic intervals, you're looking at maximum intensity for periods of 5 to 10 seconds to a ratio of 60 seconds for active rest. So this is how I write my workouts. I always put a ratio of how much effort I'm putting in to how much rest I'm giving myself. So let's talk about active rest. Active rest, it's really just very low impact movement. You want to keep your body moving so you can get your heart rate conditioned, your heart conditioned to whatever training you're doing. So it could be as simple as walking, maybe some PVC pipe work, or some just some light movement that you're doing. You're not using weights for this. You're not using really much equipment. For example, when I do my alactic intervals, I like to use my air bike. I have a ZBEX air bike. I love that thing. I love the fact that I can go straight from 5 seconds or 10 up to 10 seconds of absolute effort right into active rest, where I just sit on the bike and I move very slowly, take my hands off the handlebars, and I'm just moving. That's all. That's what it's all about. That's what active rest is. And again, you want to ideally see your heart rate recovery drop down to the 130s or so within that 60-second period. So the first couple rounds, let's say you do 10 rounds, the first 2 to 3 rounds, for me at least, I am not going to get my heart rate past 140 or so until I get to maybe the third, fourth, probably the fourth round for me. So those first few rounds, they're still providing the effect. You have to be aware of that if you're actually tracking your heart rate. So simplify this. For alactic intervals, you're looking at about 5 seconds here, 10 seconds here, depending on what area you're working on. For your sport, this would be more for power, and this would be more for your alactic capacity. So it's something to keep in mind depending on what you're wanting to work for your sport. All right, so next we will have our lactic intervals. Lactic intervals, both of these are, so it's anaerobic systems here. It's going to be fatiguing events. Not all of these conditioning methods are meant to be fatiguing, but if it's working your anaerobic system, it's going to be a fatiguing event. So these are usually low impact. I prefer low impact anyway. So these are a bit more strenuous. You're looking at 30 to 60 seconds of work, still to a ratio of about 60 seconds of active rest. So if we were to graph this, it's going to look similar. So on the lower end of the spectrum, you have 30 seconds, and then 60 seconds on the opposite end, and you're still working power and your capacity, in this example, lactic system power and capacity, your alactic power and capacity on that one. So this is difficult to do a lot of rounds in this. So for lactic intervals, you don't need to do more than 2 to 3 rounds on any given day for this. If you're doing more than that, ask somebody who knows what they're talking about, like a strength and conditioning coach, of why they're having you do this. If they are having you do this, if they programmed it into your training, there's probably a reason for it, but you don't really need more than 2 or 3 rounds. All right, so the next one is one of my favorites. I enjoy this because this really works a whole gambit of systems here, and this is called the threshold method. The threshold method, it's a good balance between your different systems, your anaerobic and aerobic systems. And I like this because you don't need much instruction, really any instruction at all, to do this. You don't need your coach to sit there with you. You can do this on your own. So we're looking at 5 to 10 minutes of lower, what we would call red zone training. And that's going to come out to having your heart rate in the 150s. and you would only need 1 or 2 rounds of this. So an example of this would be, let's say you're on a run, a treadmill would be good for this. Or really any piece of equipment will work. Ideally, you're tracking your heart rate, and you get it up to, let's say, for example, the 150s. But if you're using, say, Morpheus, for example, or if you're really deconditioned, your red zone or your the higher threshold limits of your heart rate may be lower. But I'm assuming most athletes are going to be doing this anyway. So yeah, your red zone probably actually going to be a little bit higher than this. But let's, for example, say the 150s. You're just gradually increasing your heart rate. You can do it in waves. Say minute 1, you're at a particular pace. Minute 2, you increase a little bit, and so on and so forth. So this is another metric to track your fitness level along with your conditioning. So let's say the first time you do this, you do it for 5 minutes, and within that 5 minutes, you get to your red zone. This is not meant to be an all-out effort. You get to your red zone where you have some discomfort, but not necessarily an incredibly fatiguing event. Over time, you may make it to 6 minutes before that starts to set in, 7, 8, 9, up to 10 before your system starts to tell you that it's fatigued. So that's another metric for you to measure for your conditioning. So another one that I like is called cardiac output. So this is going to be more along the lines of you doing something for a long period of time. 30 to 90 minutes is what we're looking for the time span of cardiac output. But there's a specific zone that you're going to want to stay in. For most people, it's going to be 130 to 150s, where your heart rate's going to want to stay in those zones. You do this for 30 to 90 minutes, and this will increase your aerobic capacity. But it's important to note if this is your sport calls for this, or this is the method you choose to do, to really increase your conditioning, you're looking at 5 to 6 days a week, continuously, where you need to do this kind of thing. But what I do is I mix it all up. I do all these, and we've got a few more that we'll go over. I like to really mix it up. For my cardiac output, I'll train in this time zone, but I like to do circuits. I like to do these long endurance type circuits where I just kind of bounce from one machine to another, just basically just going light. It keeps my heart rate at a good pace, and that's what I like to do because I get kind of bored going on a run or something, unless it's like a scenic deal. I don't like to run very much, but that's just me, and my sport doesn't really call for running, so that's just for me. Depending on what your sport is or how you prefer to train, that's all up to you. So another one that I really like to do is called tempo intervals. Tempo intervals are great. They're going to be working your anaerobic system pretty good. So this is of moderate intensity. So still pretty intense. 10 to 12 seconds of max effort at around not max effort, around 70%. To another 60 seconds of active rest. Now, again, the active rest, the whole idea is to drive your heart rate down. So if you notice whatever you choose to do for your active rest, your heart rate isn't dropping, just slow it down a little bit. You may just need to walk in circles for whatever you're doing to get your heart rate down. If your heart rate isn't dropping, maybe something a little more serious than that you might need to get checked out. If your heart rate stays elevated for a long period of time, it could be some medical condition, or it might be that you may need to extend your active rest period or do something a little less active for your active rest. So now there's one that I don't really like to do that much. These are high resistance intervals. I think it's a little more difficult to train these because you're looking at only a 5-second window of max effort to another 60 seconds of active rest. 5 seconds of effort. It's difficult to really get to max effort intensity with only 5 seconds. So I think a really great exercise or method for this would be if you have a hill you can go up to, do some uphill sprints or something to that effect, or if you have an air bike, a rower, or something like that, where you can go from nothing to high intensity almost immediately. I don't think a treadmill will be great for this unless you have one of those treadmills that's self-propelled, perhaps. But a regular treadmill is probably not going to be good for this. You have to wait for the treadmill to really get to an increased speed. Another one that I think is fun is called HICT, and that's high intensity continuous training. So this is not HIIT. HIIT is something different. And HIIT is, honestly, it's been kind of bastardized over the last 20 years or so. People just think they're doing HIIT, but they're not necessarily doing HIIT. You have longer intervals on HICT than you have for HIIT. So that's probably the biggest difference is longer rest intervals. Really, HIIT should be having longer intervals anyway for rest. But HICT is what we're talking about here. So once you understand this, you can kind of figure out how you want to implement this. One of the easiest ways to work HICT would be a spin bike, because you can immediate increase the intensity. You're looking at, for a spin bike, be 20 to 30 rotations per minute. But something else you could do for HICT would be uphill lunges or step-ups. I read an interesting study just last night about step-ups and the amount of muscular activation in your legs from your feet all the way up to your glutes. Step-ups has been shown to activate more muscle fibers than anything, especially squats. Squats is at the lower end of the exercises, and there's probably 10 exercises that were listed. So step-ups are not to be discounted anymore. If you can add some weight to it, that's great, maybe a weighted vest or something like that, but step-ups will really are good for anything, strength building, along with conditioning as well. You just increase the time, drop the weight, and you don't necessarily have to have these high step-up boxes to do it. You can have relatively low boxes to do your step-ups, and you do it for a long enough time, and you're activating more muscle fibers than previously thought. So I'd say maybe upwards of 30 minutes, maybe more, for HICT, and it is just that. Another example of HICT would be if you have your step-ups and you just have these explosive movements. Say you're stepping up to the box and you explode up. That could be some good HICT as well. You can just go slowly on that, do a couple seconds to get down, and take your next step. It's good examples of HICT as well. So next for this methods will be explosive repeats. So explosive repeats, it's kind of like plyometrics. Plyometrics is the next example. Let's say you are doing broad jumps. Broad jumps, say you do 8 to 10, a distance you can cover 8 to 10 broad jumps. Ideally, you want the same distance to be covered with each jump that you take. You do, up to 10 rounds of that. As long as you can continue to hit your mark, then you're doing good. This is not necessarily a fatiguing event, but it is going to work a lot of explosive power. This would be great for power lifters, strongman types, football players, that kind of thing, where you need that explosive energy going from being still to being explosive right off the bat. So next would be plyometrics. So let's see, aerobic plyometrics. So you can start with about 3 to 5 minutes and see how that feels for your plyos. And if you have a season, as you get closer to your season start, you will increase your time to maybe 10 to 12 minutes. This is another event that's not a fatiguing event. You're looking at maybe perform an exercise. Let's say something explosive like it could also be the broad jumps. It could be explosive step ups, something along those lines where you have an explosive movement. Again, it's not fatiguing. Let's say you do however many minutes you decide to do, to 2 to 3 minutes of rest, of actual rest. The idea is to be as explosive as possible, so these longer rest periods will allow you to maintain your explosiveness as you move on. We have one more to cover, and it's called cardiac power intervals. This is probably my personal favorite to perform on my own. So this is where you are going all out. You're trying to get your maximum heart rate. You're trying to find your max heart rate. So general rule of thumb for finding your max heart rate, you take 220, subtract your age, and that gives you your max heart rate. That's a general rule of thumb. It's not going to apply to everybody, but most people are going to be at least around that number, whatever it is. So over whatever period of time it takes you to get to your max heart rate, you will just gradually increase your heart rate. Gradually increase your heart rate to max or sub-max, depending on how intense you're trying to go. So let's say, for example, your max heart rate is around 190. So when you start, you're probably going to be around 100. So after a couple minutes, maybe you try to push it up to 120, 150, and it's not going to take you long once you get past this to increase your heart rate to your max. Once you get there, you are going to want to stop doing what you're doing and go immediately to a recovery breathing position. So let's talk about the recovery breathing position, because that's something that it's not quite as straightforward as it seems. So the recovery breathing position is something along these lines right here. You leaned over, bracing your upper body over your knees like this. For the longest time, I was taught this growing up in football, is this was probably the best recovery position for breathing right here. And the problem with this is you have an area right here called the zone of apposition. It's between your diaphragm and your rib cage and your lungs and all this area right here. So when you raise your arms up overhead like this, you're actually lengthening your torso, and you're actually putting a little bit of pressure on your lungs here. like this. You can do it, but it's not going to be as efficient as leaned over like this. When you extend your arms and you actually brace your thoracic cavity onto your knees like this, you allow everything to breathe in all directions. You have to think about all the directions, forward and back, all the different planes that your lungs are expanding in, 3 dimensions. So when you do this, you start to restrict that. When I was doing CrossFit for a while, you get done with the WOD and you see people lay on the floor catching their breath. I was doing it too, thinking that that's some kind of breathing technique or whatever the reason is behind it. When you do something like that, you take out an entire plane away from your lungs' ability to breathe. It's not helping you. The idea here is that you are able to maximize your heart rate and get down to a proper recovery zone within a reasonable amount of time. Doing cardiac power intervals, you probably don't need more than 2 of these to get the desired effect. What is great about a lot of these, you're going to increase your ability to your muscles to absorb oxygen for long after the exercise is over. It's called EPOC. And that's what's great about these types of high intensity training methods. All right, so that's pretty much all I have for the energy systems. If you like it, just let me know. If you have any questions about anything, you can shoot me a message, and I'm available for anything really. Just shoot me a message if you have any questions. We'll be doing another video here pretty soon. Haven't decided what it's going to be yet. If you have any requests, just let me know. And all right, that's pretty much it. Thanks, guys.